Hey there friendos, Newbornkilik here, welcoming you to the official stamp of approval Sheikah Squad wishlist for Breath of the Wild 2. Now Breath of the Wild 2, of course, was leaked a while ago, and we haven't had any new information other than Age of Calamity. I guess that's kind of news. I bumped my bird. Sorry about that. I guess. We had a little bit of news and Age of Calamity was announced. Of course, that's not Breath of the Wild 2, but at least it's some Zelda news. So, Sheikah Squad and I kind of got together and we're like, hey, what are some things that we'd like to see carry over from Breath of the Wild 1 into Breath of the Wild 2, and what things would we like to see done differently? Let me know your opinions in the comments down below. Make a top 5 list. First things first, I love Breath of the Wild's movement. I believe the stamina is a bit of a bummer sometimes, but it's also kind of necessary. If you've seen some of the things speedrunners can do, imagine what they could do with no stamina restrictions. Just throw that green goo out everywhere. It would be amazing to watch. And of course, towards the end of the game, once you get full stamina, you basically have infinite stamina plus potions and stuff like that. So keep the amazing movements, the climbing, the jumping, all that stuff. It's all so good. And keep the physics. Fans love to find these new speedrun strats and these exploits and stuff. And for some reason, Nintendo really seems to dislike that. But I really hope that Breath of the Wild 2, in some ways, may even have more movement options with the physics system.
Hello everyone, my name is Tyler Townsend, and thanks to MBK for having me on the channel today. One of my biggest wishes for Breath of the Wild 2 is a pretty common one, but one that still warrants discussing. Enemy variety. The Hyrule we saw in Breath of the Wild was giant and expansive, but often felt void of life. The focus on the world itself meant we'd be spending the vast majority of our time roaming the fields and ruins of Hyrule. Because of this, enemy encounters started to lose their uniqueness. For this Hyrule to be the largest, but lack depth and enemy variation is unfortunate. But thankfully, Breath of the Wild 2 has the potential to remedy that. With the Kingdom of Hyrule being predominantly reclaimed by nature, it would be amazing to see some Zelda staples return in the sequel. Deku Baba, Skulltulas and Gomas, Tektites, Dodongos would all make great additions to flesh out the ruinous kingdom. The regions in Hyrule should also add more thematic monsters and enemies. Instead of ice variants of the same old foes we're familiar with in the Tabantha and Hebra regions, why not add some truly one-of-a-kind creatures to these areas? The first Breath of the Wild did this a little, the example being the Molduga in Gerudo Desert. The rest of Hyrule should have this treatment. Every region should have some enemy that is solely found in that area and nowhere else. Adding more enemies into the game will also allow for more dynamic and interesting gameplay. I think Twilight Princess is a great example of how enemy design and combat work in tandem. For example, if you take a look at the Helmasaur, fighting it from the front yields no results, but with a cheeky backslice, the Helmasaur is no problem. This is something that Breath of the Wild sequel should and needs to capitalize on. Introducing new enemies and new ways to approach the combat will give what some people view as shallow gameplay some much needed depth. To that degree, I think it's possible that we could see a return of fan-favorite monsters. With the revival of Ganondorf, I don't think it's far-fetched to think that Redead's, traditional Stalfos, and even Iron Knuckles could make a return.
What's going on, guys? It's Incredible. And when I think about what I'd like to see the most in Breath of the Wild 2, the first thing that comes to mind are of course traditional dungeons, an engrossing narrative, and at the top of my wish list, it's something that I desired in Breath of the Wild. Something I low-key thought had a chance of happening. And that's a voice actor for our boy, the Gerudo King, Ganondorf. Even though I wanted it so bad, in Breath of the Wild, it would have felt out of the blue to find him waiting for us in Hyrule Castle, ready to give one of his epic speeches to this age's hero. The game more so lets Princess Zelda have the spotlight, in terms of creating character development through cutscenes. But in Breath of the Wild 2, I believe it's finally time for Ganondorf to not just get in-depth screen time, but also have a voice. Now I know he's had his superb grunts and laughs in the past, but the right voice would give him that extra layer of humanity, especially if this game goes for more of a relatable approach for his backstory. We already know we'll have some type of flashbacks involving Ganon. A story akin to the Wind Waker's depiction of him would put a sweet cherry on top of what most likely is the final chapter to his overarching tale. And what better way to do so but to give him a sexy voice in the process?
These next 2 points are going to kind of conflict with one another, and one of them is to keep the amazing exploration of Breath of the Wild. Breath of the Wild was a crazy, amazing exploration game, but in my opinion, maybe it was almost a little too exploration. Which brings me to the next point. I would like to head kind of back to proper dungeons. I mean, when I think of a proper quote-unquote dungeon, I really only think of the Yiga clan hideout, and even that's kind of putting it sparsely. But the fact of the matter is, that was the most dungeon that I felt that we ever went into, or temple, whatever you want to call them. Sure, the divine beasts were supposed to be this sort of replacement for dungeons, and have I really not had my light on this whole time? Pop that bad boy on, let's go. Light powers activate. Okay, in all seriousness, the divine beasts, I suppose, were supposed to be like the dungeons proper, and the shrines were a nice little taste, but there's something very satisfying about going into a dungeon and, you know, getting the item from there and then coming back out stronger than you were before, which is something you kind of lack in Breath of the Wild, in my opinion. Of course, you usually get a divine power from the divine beasts, but that's it. You don't really get like a new item, and I understand why. With the durability system, having an item would be kind of questionable, but you know, I'm saying that there's things that they could do, and I honestly believe that it would work out well. As we're talking about the lack of items and the reasons why we can't have them, we must talk about durability. To be honest, I don't really mind durability all that much. I mean, it kind of sucked not being able to use my cool weapons, but at the same time, I understand it. And when you break a weapon, it actually does critical damage, so it's kind of a nice way to send the weapon off, I guess. Although I do have a couple critiques that I would like for Breath of the Wild 2. In my opinion, things outside of combat should never affect your durability. For example, shield sliding. I love shield sliding. I think it's one of the most fun things to do in the game, but I'm actively discouraged from shield sliding because it's constantly lowering the durability of my very important shields. And early in the game, when you might be experimenting with these kinds of things, you have very bad shields which tend to break very often. Do you have a good shield that you can shield slide on for a very long time and it's not going to break very often? Or do you have a crappy, you know, wooden pot lid that's going to break right away and is disposable anyway, but you're going to be jettisoned off into the atmosphere as soon as it breaks? So that can be a bit of a problem in and of itself. One of the further improvements on the durability system I would like to see is a way to reinforce weapons. Say once they break, maybe they just go into a broken weapon on your inventory or something like that. Or maybe you can find a nice weapon that you really like and reinforce it, which would also kind of add to the whole augments that we used to have, such as durability up, attack up, etc. Let me kind of play with those, you know what I mean? Let me augment my weapons and do that myself. Maybe they take a page out of the Master Swords book, and once a weapon is reforged or forged to be stronger or something, it doesn't necessarily break, maybe it chips and you have to have it repaired again. This would be another great use of rupees in this game, and kind of allow them to keep this durability mechanic, but make it less obnoxious. Again, I'm not saying that I want the durability mechanic to go away altogether, because it does serve a very important role in kind of balancing the game. For example, one of the reasons that Guardians are so deadly is because if they hit a shield, it's likely going to break unless it's a top tier shield. And even then, it's not going to take too many lasers to bust that bad boy in half. It really makes you think about engaging them in the first place, or just get really good with the parry and it doesn't matter anyway.
The music of Breath of the Wild has been an area of some debate, primarily about how little of it there is. I think a majority of people agree that what music is there is wonderful. Hateno Village, Rito Village at night, the music that plays during a Guardian attack, it's all wonderful. But some people also argue that there's far too little of it. Indeed, much of your journey is spent in near complete silence. In previous Zelda games, a lack of music was used to convey something important. In Breath of the Wild, it's the complete opposite. And not everybody likes this. I've seen a lot of people wish for an overworld theme, for example. As for myself, I'm somewhere in between. I do love Breath of the Wild's use of quiet time, but I do often wish for just a bit more music. So when Newbornkilik asked me to think of something for his Breath of the Wild 2 wishlist, I knew exactly what to ask for. Something that would solve the lack of music problem, while also making the return of a much-loved mechanic from previous games. Breath of the Wild 2 should see the return of musical instruments. I think this could take a few different forms. My preference would be, of course, for an instrument mechanic akin to the N64 games to make a return, with instruments as actual equipable items, or more likely a spot on the Sheikah slate, that can be played with different button presses making different noises. The songs learned have different effects when played, just like in Ocarina of Time and Majora's Mask. I think this would translate markedly well to Breath of the Wild. The trailer seems to suggest the removal of Sheikah towers and shrines, and teleportation songs could make excellent replacements for using the towers as fast travel points. Or imagine if the Song of Storms could be learned, and just like in Ocarina, it could be used to summon and dispel rain. The misery of being halfway up a mountain and getting rained on is something that all Breath of the Wild fans are intimately familiar with. So imagine being able to find a foothold to stand, playing the Song of Storms to dissipate the rain, and continuing your climb. Or sneakily placing metal weapons all around an enemy camp, and then playing Song of Storms to rain lightning down upon your foes. This isn't even getting into the fun you could have with open world interpretations of songs like Zelda's Lullaby or Elegy of Emptiness. This would add an entirely new set of tools to manipulate the environment with, and that's the bread and butter of the Breath of the Wild experience. I understand that adding an entire new set of mechanics like that might be a bit too much though. Perhaps, like Twilight Princess, the instrument could be something that's related to specific areas around the world. Breath of the Wild saw Cass remembering ancient songs that posited hints for nearby shrines. Cass initially plays the same music for all of the ancient songs. Perhaps this time, Cass takes Link as his pupil, and together they begin finding the lost compositions these lyrics were set to. The process is similar to before, solving various puzzles based on the lyrics, but instead of Cass playing the music, he teaches Link how to. And instead of being rewarded with a shrine, you're rewarded with lost compositions. Previously, solving a shrine puzzle would make the shrine appear, and then Link would go in and get his reward. Now the process is that you solve the puzzle. Instead of a shrine, it's a piece of music, and then playing the piece of music instead of entering the shrine gives you your reward. Regardless of if Nintendo does decide to go through the musical instrument route or through having Link be Cass's pupil, or any other sort of interpretation of the act of learning music being a part of Breath of the Wild, the opportunities for the integration of instruments into Breath of the Wild are endless. And I dearly hope Nintendo has at least considered allowing our beloved Blue Boy to begin his musical journey.
Next we have an idea straight from Nehru himself, and that is dogs. Or some kind of companion. However, there were some things that I wanted to add. He has a very nice video on dogs, which you should definitely go check out for his opinions, but I have a couple things that I wanted to add to it, kind of stipulations to make it perfect, I suppose. If they did go the route of a companion animal in Breath of the Wild 2, which I personally think would add a lot to the game, for example, maybe they could catch bugs for you or something, or go and gather items from things that you eliminate. Say you eliminate a horde of keys, okay? Now you have to go all the way out, wherever they were, and grab all those items. A dog could do that for you and just present them to you in the cutest little way and be like, hey, I got this for you. Boom, you pick it up. Boom, there's like 10, key swings all in one. You just pick them up with one button command. It's super simple. Maybe you have like a ferret companion that'll dig through holes or dig bugs out of the ground for you. Like some maybe rare bugs that are much more difficult to find. Maybe you have a companion that is a bit sneakier, say like a ferret or a cat or something, and then something that may actually help you in combat, such as like a dog or maybe even a bear. I believe we're actually getting kind of into one of the negatives that a companion could have at this point, and that would be, I hope they just don't get in the way of things too often. Breath of the Wild does implement stealth, and companions tend to ruin that. So I would lead more towards a simplified companion system where there's not really a whole lot of interaction between them and the enemies. They are simply just there as a pure positive. Maybe they collect items for you, like I said, or perhaps maybe they stun enemies every now and then, but they don't really get attacked themselves too much, and if they do, they don't die. Like, you don't really have to worry about them aggroing enemies, because let's be honest, that's been frustrating in every game that it's been a thing in. But check out Nehru's video for his opinions on dogs and why we need them in Breath of the Wild as well. Great video, go check it out. When we talk about expanding things, we have to look no further than the Sheikah slate itself. It's got a tool for basically anything. It's got a time stop, it's got a freeze, it's got this water pillar thing, and I love that. However, I would love to see it expanded. Perhaps we have some things that kind of, maybe we can combine these things, and instead of having like a time stop and a bomb, maybe we can combine those into a bomb that stops time, right? That'd be pretty neat in my opinion. While we're at it, we don't need a square and round bomb on a separate little icon. Okay, we can have a square bomb, and then when you move it, it goes to a round bomb or vice versa, you know, move up or down instead of left or right. We don't need that extra spot taken up by a differently shaped bomb. I do understand that the square bomb is very useful and important, but it doesn't need its own spot. It could be a sort of sub-menu in my opinion. One of the last things that I would like to see in The Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild is an expanded combat system. Really can't express how disappointed I was that you could get this super amazing spear and yet it behaves identically to all the other spears. I get it, it does add a bit of familiarity between the weapons, but I mean maybe different attack styles even. It's not necessarily all about the combat Breath of the Wild, but it could be expanded on. Maybe Link could have a sort of offensive and defensive stance. This would, in my opinion, really negate the need for the quick time events, which, let's be honest, are just the apex strategy. They are the easy mode of the game. If you allow us more skillful options and ways to outplay our opponents, maybe we don't need to rely on these flurry attacks nearly as much. Flurry or furry? Fury. Furry. Furry attack. Get him. Maybe we don't need to rely on this kind of cheap mechanic nearly as often if we have more options at our disposal. One of the biggest offenders of this is the halberd. Okay, you just poke with the halberd. Like, what? You tell me I can't have a flip attack? Like, I can't swing that around or anything like that? I gotta poke with a halberd? Like, yeah, you can do that, but there's also a giant sharp axe head that you could be using, but aren't. But that's not really the point. Jeez. Every time I think of a halberd, I think of RuneScape and how you can just poke people over the fence. It's super funny to me. I'm not even saying that that's the most effective way to use a halberd, but it could be an option. More options for combat are rarely a bad thing, and honestly, I just would like to see it expanded on.
I love it when games are used as a storytelling medium. There's just something about how games allow you to interact with a narrative that makes me just so much more interested and invested in the stories they can tell. Many of my favorite games are those that tell a compelling story, and I don't think it's by a stroke of luck that one of my favorite game franchises also happens to be The Legend of Zelda. Say what you want about Zelda for the most part sticking to a simple premise of a story, but it's a master of reinventing the wheel and telling the same story with new twists over and over. However, Breath of the Wild 2 has ignited a brand new hope in me, a hope for something really different. Breath of the Wild was already a huge departure from the traditional gameplay of a Zelda game, and even to a lesser extent, the story was a departure as well. But this new sequel, I want it to reinvent the wheel of storytelling in the Zelda franchise entirely. Now, what exactly does that mean? It means putting a more significant emphasis on the story, and scrapping any preconceived lines of where a Zelda game's story can go. I don't want this to be a replay of the same cycle of Ganon again. I want Zelda to take this story in a darker and much more thought out direction. And the very fact they showed us a cryptic story-based trailer as our first impression of this game might just support that. In reality, Breath of the Wild 2 might not be a juggernaut of interactive storytelling, but that is my wish for it. So if my wish were to come true, Nintendo find a way to tell a fantastic, new, surprising story, and to top it all off, in an open-air world.
Thank you so much to my boys at the Sheikah Squad for joining me and helping me out with this video. They're amazing creators. You need to go check them out if I'm being completely honest. Thank you so much for watching all the way to the end. This helped me out an awful lot. If you'd like to see more Zelda content, then god dang, let me know. I know you do, alright? But still, you gotta let me know, alright? That's the only way this channel is gonna grow, let's be honest. Leave your top 5 wish list for The Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild 2 in the comments down below. And thank you so much to my patrons and channel members for continuing to support me. And everyone over on Twitch that's been supporting the streams lately, twitch.tv/Newbornkilik. We've been having a great time over there streaming some Zelda mods and Mario Odyssey. Anyway, I'm Newbornkilik, and together we are the Sheikah Squad, going dark.